In this week's class, we were asked if we had kids, which I personally do not have kids, but we were also asked if what we were learning was important, and as well as if we ever did have kids in the future, would we ever pass what we are learning down to them? I think it is an important conversation to have because racism is everywhere in our society. It is in our politics, it is in our workplaces, and it is also in our everyday interactions, whether we realize it or not. When I was young, I thought racism was something that was very obvious. I understood it to be that somebody would come up to you and would insult you about your race, kind of like bullying. It wasn't until I got older is where I realized that racism works in many different ways, especially systemically. In this week's module, we covered the Bracero program, which is a program that guaranteed Mexican migrant workers fair wages, livable shelters, and also adequate food. However, this program did not deliver on most of its promises, as a lot of wages were withheld or sometimes not given to these workers at all. The shelters that they were given were substandard at best, and the food that they were given also was either really disgusting or they weren't given food at all. Eventually, Operation Wetback was created, and it was to deport all of these migrant workers despite them being here legally under this program, some of which were American citizens as well. Despite these migrant workers being here legally because of the Bracero program, and some of them even served in the United States military because of the Great World War, a lot of them were treated with discrimination, as some of them were deported, or the ones who did stay in the United States were treated harshly despite being veterans, and some of which did not get any of the benefits of the GI Bill. I think this is an important conversation to have with your kids. It's something that I would probably talk about with my kids because it shows how systemic racism really works. It works through legislature and through policy, as well as through lawmakers targeting certain minority groups in order to take their rights away. Something else we covered in this week's modules were the Zoot Suit riots, which were an act of defiance against the wartime going on in the United States. Something I had learned in a different class on the same subject as well was that these riots were so bad mainly for the fact that there were service members nearby where these young men were wearing these suits. And just to highlight how brutal some of these riots were, there was an account that I still remember from when I took Chicano history, and it was when Navy service members had stormed a movie theater and assaulted anybody who was of Mexican descent inside, and they didn't discriminate. They assaulted women, they assaulted men, and they even assaulted a child so bad where the child's jaw was dislocated from one of the service members punching him in the face. Something that really wasn't known to me at all was the Brown Berets. I've always heard stories of the Black Panthers, and I always wondered if my community ever had something like that. So when I learned about the Brown Berets, I was very interested and also very happy to know that there was always pushback from the racism these Mexicans endured while being here in the United States. Something new that I had learned in this week's module as well was the case of Mendez versus Westminster. And the case was about instilling Mexican-only schools, which taught inferiority to these kids, as they were deemed as special needs children. Although this case was taken to the Supreme Court, it was eventually ruled unconstitutional because of those reasons listed before, being that it instills inferiority in children, and it also segregates these children from attending public schools. But it is still something worth talking about, as one, the systemic racism at this time was so bad that they saw these children as lesser than regular children. So much so where they even deemed them as special needs and put them in their own school, far away from what they deemed as regular children. As I covered in my last critical reflection journal, misogyny is something that is deeply rooted in the Mexican community. So learning about Dolores Huerta and the impact she had on the United States, so much so where she even got the Presidential Medal of Freedom, really made me happy. As well as some of the new things that have come to light in our recent time about Dolores Huerta, it has made me very happy to know that she is talked about more often.